This is The Pastor's Heart and Dominic Steele, and today positive, persuasive evangelism with Dave Jensen, David Robertson and Karl Faase. What makes an effective evangelistic campaign, and how can we connect and speak to today's culture? Today, three of Australia's leading thinkers in the area of evangelism. I stirred the pot a few weeks ago with a criticism of the Gospel Coalition Australia's pre-Easter campaign titled Jesus, History's Biggest Hoax. And in the debate that followed, it was clear that some agreed with me and some disagreed. But how could we do it well? What would be best practice public evangelism? What would that look like? And how could we actually really connect as a network of churches across Australia, but across the world even? Dave Jensen is on the team with EV Church on the New South Wales Central Coast and one of the leading thinkers in this space. David Robertson has just started with evangelism and new churches for the Sydney Anglican Church, encouraging local churches in best practice evangelism. And Karl Faase, well, he's done it all. He was the senior pastor of Gymea Baptist Church. He was the prime mover behind the Jesus All About Life campaign, responsible for Jesus the Game Changer seasons 1 and 2. And now, Karl, a new evangelistic series where you get to drive a flash car around and talk to very interesting people.
What could go wrong? I've got a V8 6-litre ute, and we're going across Australia and we're finding out where faith runs deep within Australia.
Let's start with you, Karl, because we've all had to write evangelistic titles and been responsible for initiating evangelistic campaigns. But how do you start your thinking when this is something on your table?
Yeah, I mean, you're really trying to find something, Dominic, that actually kind of resonates with people. You know, best not annoy them. Find a place where that you connect. I mean, two really quick examples. One, Paul in Acts chapter 17 is at the Areopagus. He's standing in front of a bunch of people who have got hundreds of idols. He could have very easily started, men of Athens. He wasn't being sexist, there are only men there. Men of Athens, I see that you are a bunch of godless pagans following idols. He could have started that way, but he actually started by saying, I see that you're very religious. Like there's this sense of, and they would have thought, yeah, we are, actually. And then, there's a biblical example. And then all those years ago when we did Jesus All About Life that you mentioned, we were looking at what should we call this campaign. We had the model, but we didn't have the name. So we worked with a agnostic advertising researcher, sociologist, did a bunch of research and came back and said, the church is on the nose, but people resonate with Jesus. There's this sense of they want to, they're not put off by Jesus. It's the church that's the problem. So let's go with a positive message, hence Jesus All About Life. Now that didn't come because he was a theological statement we wanted to make. That came out of what would work best in Australian culture within the last, it was 10 years ago now, which is fabulous. But the more research we do, the more it seems to just continue to confirm that.
And I spoke to you the other day and you went and checked the research again to see whether or not your thesis had been modified. Had it?
Well, I mean, we did research around Jesus All About Life, and then we've done the Australian Communities Report in 2011, and then Faith and Belief, and you can go to faithandbelief.org.au and get it all for free, 64 pages. And when we're asking people, do you see yourself as a Christian? What's your response to Christian faith? There's a very strong resonance there. Even in a culture that's supposed to be pushing away from Christianity, 62% of people either say they're a Christian or are warm to the ideas of Christian faith. That's a high percentage.
So you're saying go for that 62%.
Yep.
Don't pitch at the people who are never going to come to you.
A really well-known Australian researcher, which I won't quote his name only because this is a very loose statement, said, look, Karl, basically it breaks down to 15, 70, 15. 15% go to church, 15% are angry atheists, the rest sit in the middle, 70%.
And they're winnable.
And his point was, his point is, they're kind of open. They are winnable. They're ready. They're kind of ready to listen inside strict parameters, and that's our challenge. But if you pitch at the thinking of the 15% of kind of committed kind of atheists to agnostics to no religion, there's a chance that what you're going to do is you're not going to get far with them because they're just not interested. And then you're going to put off the 70% because they don't sit there anyway.
Dave Jensen, how do you react to that?
Yeah, listen, I couldn't agree more. I think it's crucial to read the demographics of the culture that you're living in, and that's suburb by suburb, city by city, state by state, and working out the questions people are actually asking and seeking to answer the questions people are asking, not invent questions that you think people are asking, and then produce something that really isn't resonating with people. And it's not just how you present what you're doing evangelistically, it's actually the content of what you present. I'll give you an example. I've worked in the multicultural western suburbs of Sydney. I've also worked in Northern Ireland, a very heavily religious country, and now I'm working in sort of secular Australia. We actually produce the same content, give or take, in our evangelism. We do an evangelistic course that presents the gospel in a compelling and clear manner so people understand who Jesus is and what he's done. And by the way, in the 70% that Karl just spoke about, that's what they're not understanding. They don't understand the foggiest about Christianity. So they're the questions we need to be answering. The way we presented it to the multicultural western suburbs was calling it explaining Christianity. Because many of them identified theistically or with Christianity. They were open and warm with Christianity. They like Christianity, but they have a foggy idea of what it is. In Northern Ireland and Belfast, heavily religious, divided religious community, if we called it explaining Christianity, actually it would turn people off. Because they'd say, I am a Christian. What do you mean? I am a Presbyterian. I am a Catholic. I'm not going to come to this. So we called it life. And in the secular New South Wales, secular Australia, again, we gave it a title of life. I didn't, but the church I'm at did, to provoke positive feelings, but also that it was a little bit, it's not vague, isn't the word, but provocative. That, life, what is my life about? Because we've identified, the church that I work at has identified, actually that's the question people are asking. What is life about? What's the meaning of my life? And so we want to tap into that in a positive, affirming way. And I couldn't agree more with Karl. That, and I don't even know in Australia, 15%, I think that's even bigger than it is. I think it's 5% of people would know the name of Richard Dawkins. I don't think the most Australians are vague or lethargic, but there's a warmth towards Christian things that most people still have, and let's try and tap into that. That would be my perception.
David Robertson, I called you one of Australia's leading thinkers before, but you've got the Scottish background. How are you processing all of this? Because you're now thinking about how to get evangelism going in Sydney.
I am. I mean, it's interesting, the other two guys, can I push back a little bit?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. No, we want a bit of that.
Well, I agree about the questions, by the way. I'm amused sometimes when I get asked to go and speak at places here, and it's often questions that, you know, non-Christians will have, and half of them are questions non-Christians don't have. I've never heard them ask. You know, so I think one of the key things we then have to do is obviously listen. I was interested in yours, though. That was, you know, the titles and so on, because I remember being asked to speak at a university mission, and the title was, that they plastered all over the place, was, Should Christians Go to Hell? And actually, an atheist complained to the university that this was discriminating against Christians, not realising it was the Christians themselves who put up the advert.
So I don't think that's a good title.
Oh no, I didn't either. So when I spoke, I said that. For a start, I think it. I mean, it was provocative and it was negative, and it worked. But for me, I just think it made light of hell, actually, to be honest.
Right, but also it might work in terms of getting somebody to that event, but for the people who don't come, it doesn't help in the long run, I don't think. I'm push back on me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not too bothered about the people who don't come at one level, about what they think of an advertising campaign, because they forget it. That's not the main issue for me. What I'm interested in, though, the real thing I'm interested in is Karl's thing about Paul in Athens, because it's true. He didn't say, you bunch of godless pagans. He did say, I see that you're very religious. But that was like a boxer going, come on, put him down, I'm not going to harm you. And then when he put him down, he went, yeah, you see all that money you've spent on the Areopagus? You wasted it, guys. Yep. Billions you've wasted. God doesn't live there. And I mean, that was devastating to them. So I think you're right, but I think I think our evangelism fails a lot because we try and be too nice.
Yeah, I mean, interesting. If I can just agree with you, because I think where he starts is to connect. But the last four things he said is God's going to judge you. You're all ignorant, and without God, you're who knows where you're going to end up. There's this where he ends is a very firm statement about what we would believe is the gospel. Where he starts is very different.
And also he says another thing culturally. He challenges them. He says, "You Greeks are the same as the barbarians." Which is another. I mean, what he says in that, and I don't believe we have the full record of that. I think that went on all day, and I think it was interaction and questions. I think what I'm getting at as well is my inclination sometimes is to go for the 15% in the sense of, I don't mean go for them by trying to say, okay, I'm going to convince you otherwise, because I found that in doing that, sometimes people go, okay. Basically, everything you do, you have an opportunity to say, I agree with you completely, by the way, when we agree on the main stuff, which is that we are, because this is iron sharpening iron, or wood sharpening wood or whatever, rubber sharpening rubber. No. But no, I agree with you completely, that we're trying to communicate who Christ is. I actually think the 70% don't know who Christ is. I think the 15% don't know who Christ is. So that's where your thing is. And basically, I'll use anything. And if that includes debate and argument or going on a secular website and being called all kinds of names, I'll do it as long as I'm remembering I'm not here to defend myself or to defend the church. I'm actually here to proclaim Christ. And if you can do that, that's fine. Now, it's horses for courses.
That does work for a personality like yours who can cope with that controversy.
I'll just say that, David, my experience has been, particularly on campuses, doing university work here in the UK, I feel that resonate. And to get attention to actually, and it gives confidence to Christians, hold on, we can hold our ground here, we've nothing to be afraid of. My perception, though, has been, it's just horses for courses, of saying, hey, on a campus or in a highly educated area, in a city where we are, the inner city, well, how we do ministry evangelism here, that's very different to Mount Druitt. It's very different to Gaimea. To actually, most Australians haven't been to university. They don't have any relationships with Christians, of course, but they're not firm either way. And so I think it's going, yes, we do want to present that we've nothing to be ashamed of. We want to be strong on these issues. And I would say it's actually the content of if we're talking courses for a moment. So if you call your course Introducing God, or Jesus a Game Changer, or Life, and then week 3, you actually have a moment where you go, right, boom, here's what godlessness looks like. Here's atheism, or you look at historicity of the Bible. Amen. I think that's absolutely what we should be doing. But it's actually about realising it doesn't appeal to a lot of people. To the average suburban Aussie wouldn't be grappling with those questions, I think.
Well, I agree. And I'm not saying that. And in fact, I find often on campuses, people are far too nice. I find when I go into working class environments, my, how shall I put it, somewhat loving and gentle personality works better.
That's right.
I was asked once in a place, why are you such an idiot? And I said, so I can have an incarnational ministry with someone like you. And when we're done, I'll explain to you what incarnational means. And the guy just laughed, and so that I'm not talking about that. I'm interested though. Can I ask you both a question? I know you're supposed to ask the questions, but
I've just asked one question. I'll let you guys go.
I agree about horses for courses, and I think there's a huge variety of stuff, and I think we use media, and I think, churches tend to confine themselves to, we're going to do this one thing, and I think that's crazy. But, you said horses for courses, and I'm thinking about courses. I've noticed here huge emphasis on using courses. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't use them, but is that always appropriate? Is there ways of doing evangelism without actually running an evangelistic course?
Yeah, so if I'll I think we're at a certain time of history in Australian history where courses are proving across the board to be the most usable, replicable, repeatable, simple method for churches to use and capture their church within evangelism. 30 years ago, it was diagnostic evangelism with Chapo and this sort of stuff. Before that, it was the big event parade. In 10 years' time, it might well be different. It might look different. But the churches that generally produce the most fruit in evangelism are churches which have as a baseline core, and I think this is the important distinction, David. It's not saying, hey, we can't also encourage a special event or a weekly, whatever it is, or a one-to-one, but as a baseline that in the fabric of our church, the churches that tend to see the most conversions are one which have evangelistic course running every term. And it doesn't have to be big and wow. Although the bigger and more wow it is, generally the more the church get captured by it. But it so happens that the churches that are seeing most conversions run these courses every term. A few principles, they're regular, they're in the calendar, they're of a high enough quality that church believe in them, and they jump in.
And the membership need to have confidence in them.
And so that's right. And so the membership come along, and so the two objectives of the course is to see the lost saved and see the saints equipped that I can come to this thing. I can in fact, I've been invited to be a host or be a table leader. Oh, this is so they can improve in theirs. And I think once you have that baseline down, Bob's your uncle about, hey, whether it be the Word one-to-one or whether it be about a Share Life campaign or guest preachers in and these kind of things. So I think we do want a wide variety of events, but if we don't have something regular in the calendar, every term that people can partake in.
And the non-Christians, they're not crying out, save me, save me, save me. So when you run your schedule for your church, you think, oh, well, will we put one of these on a year or will we put 4? And if you take the bold leap and put 4 on, then you've got to go around and find people for every
the
one of them.
proactive thing that it...
I reckon the other key thing about the courses is that it's building relationships. And within relationships, is it because the course is brilliant? I'm sure they are. But within relationships, faith is passed on. And I think that makes a huge difference.
Well,
and that's what
the
helps
meal.
in courses.
That's what, I mean, that when Nicky Gumbel and
The
Alpha...
meal over time. Yes. Yeah. Time and relationship.
The whole point of that was hospitality. But I think, I agree completely. Mr. Jensen's such a wise man. But I do agree completely with that.
But you do need, I find, scooping events to kind of... whether it's Christmas to scoop into the Term 1 course or Easter to scoop into the Term 2 course, but we do find we need something to kind of kick the dust in the air that we then invite. Do you do that or not?
Oh, well, certainly. So we use the language of contact and connect events. The danger with those things, of course, is if you don't have the... whether it be the course or the one-to-one focus or the guest speaker, at the end of it, it's like telling a joke without the punchline. You do all your pre-evangelistic, come on guys, to nothing. And so you want to make...
It's no good without the course.
It's no good without... And then the course is no good without follow-up at the end of it, and all these sort of things are part of it. I'm terribly interested in David's experience in the UK. In the UK, my experience was... kind of like grabbing a bunch of bullets and throwing it at a wall in the churches that were doing good stuff, trying hard. So it might be, right, we've got the men's curry night, we've got the Word one-to-one, we've got Christian Explored, we're going to do all these things at the same time. And I think in Australia it might be that we're more simple, but we couldn't do it. I think it's having too high an expectation of your church member, and I think we want to make it as simple as possible, not buying into the myth that 100% of our church attenders will partake actively in one-to-one Bible ministry. They're not going to do that. So we want to give them an opportunity. And I think we're better at it than, when I say we, I think people with a high emphasis of courses, at least we got a real strength in that. But I mean, the UK seems like a different scene to me. But
well, I think the UK were probably a little bit more desperate. I mean, I used to say that my methodology was to throw 12 darts at the board, hoping that 1 or 2 would stick. Laterally, I struggled because all of them were sticking, which was great. But,
praise God. Yeah.
But having said that, I want to go just a wee bit. It's interesting that we're talking about feeding into courses and so on. There's 2 things that we haven't mentioned yet. One is media, which I think is absolutely crucial in terms of the marketplace. I think the marketplace is the media right now, generally. I mean, there are other ways of contacting and so on, but I think media is hugely important. But the other is the church. So I know plenty of people. I mean, if you'd said to us, what were we trying to get people to? Were we trying to get them to a course, or were we trying to get them to church? The argument I would make is we were trying to get them to church. Why? Because primarily it's in the church. They see, by this all men will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another, and so on. And I wonder if a little bit if there's not a danger in running courses where we're saying to people, if you do this, So I think courses can be a useful tool, but I suspect this is what happened in the UK. Christianity Explored and Alpha were pretty big. Then we discovered with Christianity Explored 10 weeks was too long. They cut it to 7 weeks. So I know that they're about to do Hope Explored, which will be 3 days.
Yeah, shorter the better, I think that's right.
We also found that getting people, non-Christians, to commit to coming to something for 7 weeks in a row was very difficult. Yeah. And what we found was actually a combination of that plus one-to-one. And I'm not talking about the word one-to-one. I'm just talking about someone sitting down, reading, doing it with them. I mean, it's like, I think sometimes when we talk about these things, we set up one thing against another. And I think part of what you were trying to say here, or when we were setting all of this up, is it possible to have one overriding theme around which we can unite as a local church, kind of bespoke, but also national churches. Because one of the things in the UK was we had this, pray thing. And to be honest, I wasn't that keen on it. But I tell you, when I saw the slogans on buses, I thought, do you know this? At least there's some publicity. At least it's something that we can point to. Who's against prayer?
Well, I'm looking. I mean, you just talked about media a minute ago, and I'm looking over at the UK, and they've got this A Passion for Life UK. You ran Jesus All About Life, and I'm just thinking, I wonder if there's something that...
Let me just say about the Jesus All About Life and what we, in the background of what we're trying to do. We were trying to do that. I was running Guymer Baptist Church at the time. Was that the answer for evangelism? Of course it wasn't. Is there any such thing? Is there the silver bullet? Whether there's one or 20, there's not. But one of the things that I find is that when you're running a church, Dave's in the middle of running church now, Dominic, that's your life. It's hard work.
Yeah.
You get buried in it. And as a mate of mine says, Karl, I'm drowning in trivia. And the problem is that overwhelms you. And then somebody says you need to do evangelism, and all it does is creates guilt, because you just can't get at it. You're just trying to keep your head above water. Where Jesus All About Life, A Passion for Life, this prayer thing that was on the side of buses, it lifts everybody's heads up a bit. There's something more than just running church.
The sum
every
is
week.
bigger than the...
Absolutely. And so, as long as it's got a positive message that engages people, there's the starting point. What you do with it is a completely different thing, but we all need something that lifts our head above the parapet, who gets our eyes out of the kind of mire of running church every week and says, let's do something positive that influences our community.
Dave?
It's an interesting thought. I couldn't agree more, mainly because, as we were chatting beforehand, across Australian evangelical churches, most Australian evangelical churches, if they were an honest assessment of how they're going with evangelism, would be fairly poor. It'd be non-existent, reactive, highly reactive, guilt-ridden, and as you say, the last lever that you're able to push after you're dealing with all the litany of other things that you've got. I've been very lucky to be employed solely as an evangelist in churches. But in most churches, which are one sort of minister, that sort of thing, it can't exist, so it's very difficult. So yes, I want to say, I think something external that people can hold on to, be part of something bigger, in principle, and certainly in practice for some, works very well. I think I've probably been, not burned is the wrong word, I remember seeing the Connect 09 thing in the Sydney Diocese. That was the desire to see the whole Sydney Diocese on mission.
Well, clearly I had nothing to do with that.
and I think that I remember in hindsight, and I was not involved at all, but I remember viewing it in hindsight, going, part of the difficulty was that each church is its own fiefdom, and each minister and pastor has, in fact, and can be very resistant to people excited, and in fact, the people most resistant are the people doing well. So the people doing well, the market leaders, are the ones going, we don't need, thank you, whoever, we don't
come
need
along
you
and
to
change
don't
our
come,
system.
don't change,
It's
don't tell
working
us
for
what
us.
to do. And yet for it to work, so if we use the Sydney Diocese as a non-member of the Sydney Diocese, well, Dominic, you're the only one. Oh no, well, I guess David, you are now.
You are now.
Remember.
Yeah, apparently my licensing in, so if you're watching, whoever decides that, that's right. Anything that's said wrong, blame these guys.
So we'd want to say, hey, so what would that look like? And an organism like Sydney would look like the biggest churches, and I won't name them, saying, hey, we're doing this. And the people running that, filtering that down and down and down, and then helping them put it on and helping them do it. But also tying in directly with what I think David made a compelling point about church, that actually it's what's happening on the Sunday that matters most. And actually, a bit like Simon Manchester wrote not long ago, if what's happening on the Sunday is poor and is not attractive and is actually absolutely foreign to the outsider, well, it's not somewhere you necessarily want them to come, but you want it to be. So it's part of a bigger picture, but the principle of it I love. And can I say, I think one of the strengths of a church like Hillsong is its uniform branding. That they go, the greatest Christian marketing campaign probably is cross equals love. I mean, they've done that. They whip it. It's in the sky, and you can guarantee that every of their campuses is doing the same thing because they've got that uniform type thing. We can't do that.
Yeah, one of the pushbacks on Jesus All About Life was I'm talking to church leaders all over the place, and one of the pushbacks was, well, what if they turn up to church? Dave's going to pull us all apart, but let me just say.
Okay, go for it.
Let me just say, though, one of the things that we were saying, I hear exactly what you're saying, Dave. One of the things we were saying is, look, we can't solve the church's problems, and we can't wait till the church is as perfect as we would like it to be. At some point, we've got to go, let's have a go. So
yeah, but okay, this is right. This is really, really, really important, because this is why personally I think I'm here, and why I came to Australia, because I thought that I think you've got tremendous resources over here in your churches and your people, and you've got a society that's pulling different directions away from that and connecting these. So what you said there, this is this connect issue. You said you're right about churches. I mean, you're right about church. You're producing this stuff. I think media produces material that churches use, but ultimately the church is the reality that people need to be introduced to. And I think the key question then becomes, and this is the hard one for a church leadership to face, if the number one reason for people coming to church is they're invited by their friends, are my congregation inviting people? And if they're not, why not? And the number one reason they're not is because they don't think it's worth inviting them to.
That's exactly.
And so, therefore, although I'm not going to pull it apart, because we're not waiting for perfection.
Yep.
But if your church is not worth inviting someone to, you finish as regards evangelism.
But I've found that as we do the evangelistic course, the leaders of the evangelistic course are realising, oh, this is where the non-Christians are at, because they're telling me over the table, and then they campaign for the church meeting to change, to become accessible for them to bring the people.
And I say from the privileged position of an assistant minister, so I've never been had to pull these very difficult levers as in the lead chair. But I couldn't agree more that actually, if your church is not growing, that the senior pastor has to self-assess with divine discontent and say, hold on, what am I doing wrong? What am I not? What's not happening that's making my congregation not bring people? And I think it's all too easy for us to say, oh well, the car parking's an issue, or oh well, the Presbyterians up the street, or Hillsong up the street, taking. But actually, if it's good enough, if what you're doing is appealing to your saints, your Christians, and filling them with confidence that they'll bring people, not in an itching ear way, but in a gospel-hearted way, they will come. Yeah. And that's a very difficult question to ask of yourself.
Can I give an example of that?
I just want to ask my second question.
All right.
Oh, if we have to move on.
We got 10 to go.
Just before we run completely out of time. If we were to have a national campaign or something like that, and there was to be a banner under which it was under, how would you even go about thinking about that banner? How would you think about that kind of title? David, where would you start?
I would use something that wasn't clickbait, that was pleasantly, positively provocative. I think, listen, I'm not a huge fan of Alpha, their material. I think their marketing is very good. Asking questions, positive questions on their banners and this sort of stuff. So I love the word. I've had great experience with the word life. That life, and it could be a tagline underneath. It could be anything. It's fairly simple, but there's not one person you meet, the guy at the shop or the bus, whoever it is, who hasn't thought about what is my life actually all about. And I'm convinced the questions most people are asking, multicultural, white, Anglo, working class, is not historicity. It's not postmodernism. It's not, those things are there. We need to address them. But the bigger question is, why am I alive? And that's what the gospel obviously is.
It's life, it's relationships.
Yep. It's relationships, and that's it's vague enough, if you know what I mean, that it encapsulates all of those things. Now, it just so happens that I work at a church which we run a series called Life. I'm not saying it's that series. I've always loved that.
It's the branding rather than
I've always loved that as a tagline.
Yeah, I mean, I would follow on that, and out of the things that we've been doing, obviously, let's not be afraid of the fact that we're standing for and with and promoting the name of Jesus. Yeah, don't be thinking that that's somehow, we've got to use life to get people in, and then about 5 weeks later we'll slip Jesus in. I agree. And that hopefully it won't turn them off. We live in a community that's actually quite open to some sort of spirituality, and that Jesus has a reasonably positive position within our culture.
And you're actually right, Karl, on that. I remember in Belfast we ran Life, a different series, but we called it that. And then on week one, the week begins, the first talk is, your life is only explained by the life of Jesus. And then we go through Mark's Gospel for 4 weeks. And I remember the feedback from some of the people initially was, that's, you made it sound like a sort of Tony Robbins course by the outside, but actually you're talking about the life of Jesus. So I'm with you on that, and I think the name of Jesus is powerful. And it's a provocative name. People will listen to it. So yeah, I agree.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming in this afternoon.
Can I offer you just one thing that might be a little bit provocative?
Yeah.
I think we should run with "Love is love."
Okay. Why?
because also, I mean, "love is love" is a phrase that is used regularly in, obviously with LGBT and all that kind of stuff. It's like taking over the rainbow. God is love. I think we need to take it back. And I think I think it would be provocative. At the same time, I think it's very open, it's very positive. Because when you say love is love, you're saying, well, what is love? And you're saying God is love, and this is love that we loved, that, and so on. I'm not convinced about using the name Jesus in a headline, because for a lot of people, that's meaningless. And I think you can, and I think it's provocative. I also, by the way, just think that the big problem here we've got is what these two guys were both saying. I think they were saying this, I'm sure they were, that we need to get evangelism in the DNA of our churches. And I think then when you do that, all this creative stuff will come anyway. I think we find what works locally, but I quite like "Love is love" because I was at a school and I used the phrase "love is love" and said it's completely meaningless until you define what love is, and then there was a petition to ban me. So
You get banned all over the place.
that's all I said. I said "love is love." What does that mean? And
My guests on the Pastor's Heart this afternoon, David Robertson. He's new with evangelism and new churches in Sydney. Karl Faase. What is your title? Olive Tree Media.
Yeah, CEO of Olive Tree Media.
CEO of Olive Tree Media.
media oligarch.
And Dave Jensen from EV Church on the Central Coast. And this has been the Pastor's Heart. We'll look forward to your company next Tuesday afternoon.